Hi, it's Lori Numberman from Common Sense Home, and today we are going to bake something yummy, specifically the French bread from my book, Never Buy Bread Again. And you can make this into bowls of French bread, or you can make it into French bread tryst, or you can make this into a bread bowl for soup. Whatever way you choose to have it, it's tasty and yummy and oh so good and not very hard to make. Okay, we start with 1 1/4 cups of warm water. I've heated this up prior to us getting started to make it a little bit easier. The great thing about this recipe is that it only has 5 ingredients, so it's really, really simple. And then we also have a tablespoon of sugar. I've got some bulk organic cane sugar over here, and about a tablespoon of quick yeast or safe instant yeast. If you're using the regular bread yeast, you can use a little bit more of that, and you want to get that in. The quick instant or the safe instant yeast or quick bread machine yeast does not need to proof, but if you're using regular dry active yeast, that does need to proof, so you'd add that with the sugar and your warm water in your bowl, and then let's get that mixed in. Do not turn our turbo so you don't splash all the water out. Now with this safe instant yeast, it's a quick yeast. I don't need to let it sit and proof, so we're gonna move on with the rest of the recipe. But there's more information on this in the bread book, working with your different types of yeast. And then we've just got about 3 1/2 cups of flour and a little salt. So I'm gonna get my first cup of flour in, and a teaspoon of salt. Set that off to the side. The crazy thing is, back when I was a young mom, I did not make my own bread. I just purchased bread from the store, like, you know, most folks. And even though my mom, sometimes she made bread, sometimes she didn't. She did a lot of different baking, but with 6 kids in the house, sometimes, and she didn't have the automatic mixer and so forth, and the bread machine and yada yada. So she didn't always make homemade bread. And I just got out of the habit when I was a young mom. So I had purchased some French bread for the holidays, and we had family over for Christmas. I made fondue and cut up the bread chunks to dip in the fondue. And we had family over, and then there were leftovers. So we invited some other friends over to help clean up everything that was left. And there was a friend of a friend ended up showing up. And he was actually from elsewhere in Europe. But he tasted the French bread, which by this point had been sitting around a couple days. And he says, I don't know who sold you this French bread, but any respectable French person would not eat this bread because it has been sitting around too long. And there is really a huge difference between fresh made and couple-day-old bread. And now that I have been back in my baking groove for some time, yeah, stale bread turns into croutons, turns into bread pudding, turns into awesome French toast. But to have the best French bread, fresh French bread is what you need. And I have 3 cups of flour in here, and it's pretty dry in the house because it's winter time right now. So I am betting that 3 cups is all that I need, that I don't need to take it all the way to 3 1/2 cups. So I'm looking at this mixing, and you can see it's trying to jump out the top of the bowl. And I think I'm going to turn this off and actually knead by hand and see where we're at. But you don't have to do that. You can let the mixer do the work. But when you mix by hand, it does give you a feel for how the dough goes. And you can use, like I said, I've got the dough hook on my KitchenAid here. When I make a double batch, I use the Bosch universal mixer, because I think this is the 8-cup KitchenAid probably. This thing is for my wedding, which was 20 something years ago. I got this as a gift from my mom and my sister. because of course the kitchen should have a nice heavy duty mixer. So I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of flour here. They got me that so I don't try to overwork my KitchenAid too much. For a single loaf of bread or single batch of bread, it's fine. But for double batches, I've got bigger equipment, or you just use more muscle. Now when you're kneading your bread, you want to sprinkle a little bit of flour on your countertop so that your bread doesn't stick, and that can help you incorporate the last of the flour. And then I gently work this around, and you need it, you can fold it, and let's see, I wonder, can you get the camera down a little bit, honey? So we can focus in on the kneading. And sprinkle a little bit more flour as I use that up. And you push down with the heel of your hand and fold it over in on itself. And I usually tag team, switch from side to side, and fold and grip and just knead it back and forth. And as that sucks up the flour, then we can add a little bit more flour, get it coated again, and keep going. And I'm going to keep at this for about, I don't know, however long it takes. 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes. As I keep kneading, the texture of this bread is going to change. And it's going to become smooth and elastic. And you'll notice as you're working it, the feel of the bread really shifts. Now you can, again, you can do this with your dough hook and let the machine do the work. But it just seemed like with the dry conditions in the house, my bread was being just a little bit particular today. And I just felt like mixing by hand. So there we go. And I can feel this bread starting to change. And of course you don't even need to use the mixer if you don't want to. I'm rounding up all my stray bits of flour from the countertop here. You can just mix it in a large bowl. Skip the mixer altogether. So if you don't have a heavy duty mixer with a bread hook, it's not a problem. This recipe is pretty forgiving. And I'm going to keep mixing and kneading here. You know, kneading is kind of therapeutic too, because you can kind of get all your aggressions out with the dough. Like smash some that frustration right into the countertop. Keep it going. And I can feel the bread dough starting to change at this point. And I don't know how much you can see it, but it's starting to get a little more stretchy than it was. And it's not terribly sticky, so I think I've got enough flour in it. You can see it's more stretchy than silly putty, but the consistency is kind of similar. It's pretty dense. It's not like a cake batter when you're working with bread. And that natural gluten is coming out, and that's what makes it elastic. And when you're working with bread, of course you want to follow basic kitchen protocols. Always clean down your work surfaces before you get started. If you're working with liquids and even your other ingredients, it's helpful to have them warm or at room temperature because your yeast likes it nice and comfy. Just over 100 degrees. Like, think about sinking into a warm bath. If you cannot put your yeast into your warmed up water, or I mean if you can't put your hand into your warmed up water and keep it there, or you know, testing the temp with a finger, then it's going to be too warm for your yeast too. So if you're comfy with the temperature of your ingredients, your yeast will probably also be happy. For flour, I typically buy organic hard wheat in bulk. Sometimes I grind my own. Sometimes I get the pre-made. It just depends. I confess, lately I have been getting, I think, what was this? It had a label on there. It's Natural Mills Golden White, which is a white wheat. And it is a little faster if I don't have to start with fresh flour, but this recipe will work just fine if you grind your own wheat berries, because I have made it like that too. And I'm thinking I'm getting pretty close here. I can feel it. It starts to get smoother. The bread takes on an almost velvety texture as it's getting right for the first raise. And I think I have got that going on here. At least pretty darn close to it. You see, that didn't really take very long. Didn't even get a big workout. But I'm gonna mix just a little bit more. You can't really overmix your dough if you're mixing it by hand. You can overmix it if you're mixing with the mixer. So be aware of that. Do not just put your ingredients in there and hit the turbo boost, because that can overheat and actually tear the structure of the bread. So it isn't nice and elastic and beautiful. But when you're mixing by hand, just go with it and mix and knead. Sometimes I do it like this, just punch it in from either side. Sometimes fold it over. Just whatever's comfortable for you. And let me see here. I think that is pretty good. So you see, this is what it looks like before we do our raise, but I'm gonna put this back in the bowl and put it in a warm spot. And I'm used to doing this with a bread machine, so it has a timer on it, but I like to let this rest for about 8 to 10 minutes. And cover that up. So I'm gonna let this raise for about 8 to 10 minutes. The stains are from wine and jelly making. The towel is not dirty. And let that raise a little bit, and then I'm gonna punch it down, and then we're gonna let it do its full raise to where it doubles in size, and then we'll punch it down, roll it out for baking. So let's take a little break here and come back in about 8 to 10 minutes. I just realized after I left that I said about 8 to 10 minutes, and I typically leave this around 20. So if we look at this, we can see, I'll pull this out so you can have a little peek-see at it, that this has grown up a fair amount already in that short time that it was resting. But I'm gonna punch this down, down, back towards its original volume. Stick it back in its bowl. And if you like, you can grease your bowl so that the dough comes out a little bit easier and you have a little bit of softer surface on the bread. That is up to you. It's going to be a crusty French bread anyway, so sometimes I don't bother. Okay, now we put this back to sleep. Let it sit for typically about an hour, maybe a little bit less, depending on how warm your kitchen is. And by that point, it should have doubled in size and be ready to roll out into a loaf or breadstick or other shape of your choice. Okay, our dough has roughly doubled in size. I'm going to set that off to the side and try not to drop it on the floor. You can see it's all nice and poofy. It smells wonderfully like a yeasty beastie. So I'm going to take this, and today I think we're just going to make a basic loaf of French bread. So we'll start with that. And then maybe, if you would ask nicely, or if anybody has any interest, I could make it into other things and demonstrate that as well. But start here with the basic stuff, because that is a good place to start. And to make our French bread, we want to roll this out into a rectangle and apply a little muscle. You can force a little bit more as you reach those ends and push down the right way and let up to get that rectangle going. And shove it on out to the corners. See if you can get it as even as possible so you have a nice symmetrical loaf. And run it out there. And on the side here I have my knuckle in the bread dough. No, I did, but that doesn't really matter. I have my pan for baking, and you want to either lightly grease your pan or put a liner in. So I've got a Silpat mat in there to keep the bread from sticking. So your choice, whichever you like. If you happen to have stoneware pan, stoneware baking sheet, those are awesome too. And you can dust some cornmeal on that if you like that kind of finish. But really, there is not a whole lot to this. I think I've got a reasonable size here. Fill out the edges just a little bit more. And then set that up, and then we're going to roll this up and roll evenly, a little bit here, a little bit there. Oh, I think I left my middle too fat. So I'm looking here, I got a little wide load action going on. So I'm going to spread that out, back up, spread it out just a little bit more. I confess, I am not entirely comfortable in front of the camera, so I get a little bit ahead of myself at times. But you can do that. Your bread is forgiving. Love your bread will love you. It's all good. I'm gonna smooth out that fat center a little bit more. Spread it on out here. And you want to kind of keep an eye on your pan size. So you aim for your length of your bread just under the length of your pan, because it will expand a little bit more as it raises. And it will grow out and fill up that pan. All right, let's try again. Do not roll off the counter, you stay over there. There, that's better. Just bring that in. And if you find your bread dough is a little bit sticky, you can certainly spread a little flour on your counter. Another trick I use is this dough scraper, which is really awesome. You see it's got a little handle on this side, flat scrapey part on this edge. And that will help you neatly remove just about anything from your countertops. Make sure that's tucked under on each end. And we'll pull our pan over and get that centered on there. Okay. And there we have our loaf of French bread. Now once again, we want to cover this and let it raise till it's about double in size. And then we're going to prep our glaze, saltwater glaze, where you have 2 tablespoons of water and a half a teaspoon of salt. And then we're going to brush this spread just before it goes in the oven with our salt water to get that nice crispy crust. Okay, so we've had a chance for this to rest, and you can see that it's about double in size. And I'm going to take my bread knife and I'm going to cut a few slices across like this to give it room to expand as it's baking. And then we're going to mix up the glaze. I have 2 tablespoons of water in here, and into that I'm going to put 1/2 teaspoon sea salt. You can use whatever salt you have available. I like sea salt because I enjoy the flavor and the trace minerals. And I'm going to mix that up a little bit. And this is a feather pastry brush. This was, my mom used to call this a mastichka. And it's made out of duck feathers, and that was gifted to me from a neighbor of ours. But you can use a grilling brush or another pastry brush, whatever you can find available. Heck, you could even use a little corner of a kitchen towel if need be. And now I'm going to brush this over the top of the loaf. And there are a variety of ways to do the whole crispy crust thing. Professional bakers actually have ovens that produce steam, where they will purposefully steam the oven before they put the bread in to get their crispy crust. But for the home baker, simply brushing the crust with the salt water solution is simple and easy and quick. if you want to get fancy, there's all kinds of things you can explore. So I'm gonna make sure you get that covered from end to end. And your French bread is a great recipe to pair with soups. Something where you need a little bit heartier crust for dunking. You want to hold up when you put that in the soup. When it's a day old or a couple days old, depending on your schedule. This also makes awesome French bread because the crust is sturdy enough to hold up to soaking in the egg solution. And I've got a French bread recipe in the bread book to pair up with your, or French toast recipe, I should say. Did I say French bread or French toast? But it makes good French toast, so with your eggs, milk, spices, whatnot. And there is a recipe for French toast in the bread book. And also makes good bread pudding, if you're inclined that direction. Those little crispy edges make a nice mix of textures in your pudding. Okay, so we're done here. And now this goes into a 400-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. Set the timer. And off we go. I always like to set it at the low end of the time, especially if you're not too sure about your oven. Our oven is reasonably new. You can always add time, but you can't take it away if it's overbaked. So you're looking for a nice light golden brown finish on the bread. Our timer just went off. Time to check how our bread is doing. And ooh, that is pretty. We have a lovely loaf of golden brown bread. Crash! And I'm going to get out our cooling rack. Move some things out of the way. I should have prepped before I got the bread out of the oven. And I'm going to move this to the cooling rack to cool completely. And you can see that puffed up during baking and turned into a nice loaf. Whoop, crash. And here's our beautiful loaf of French bread. Now you can cut into this right away, but if you do that, you should finish it all up in one sitting because the steam will escape and your leftover bread will dry out. But if you have enough people to eat it all at once, go ahead and serve it warm. Now, normally I would let this cool a little bit because we typically have some leftovers and that'll keep it a little bit better without drying out. This also makes awesome French toast, as I mentioned. You can turn this into French bread pizza by slicing the long way and loading it up with your favorite toppings. You can also make this into very, very good garlic bread. Just slice it this way or this way, your choice. Slather it with butter and garlic or olive oil and garlic and toast until lightly brown. And it's really good with soups. Really good, go along with just about everything. If you'd like the recipe, again, this is featured in my book, Never Buy Bread Again, which is available in print and digital formats now. And if you have any questions, just leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching.